questions in the question and answer section or in the chat, and we'll follow that up after. Each person's got 10 minutes, and then we'll have discussion after that before the next one. Phil.
Great. Thanks, Alistair. I'm just going to crack on with very little introduction, other than to say I'm the Techability Manager and Assistive Technology Lead. Today I'm just going to give you a bit of a background to Techability, and then I'm going to talk about three key lessons that we've learned over the last year about assistive technology, and not all of them are directly technology related, has to be said. So a little bit of background on Techability. We exist really in the first instance to support specialist colleges right across the UK. So these are further education organisations that have a specialist remit for young people with disabilities, and that covers a wide spectrum. But we provide consultation for them, but we have a wider reach in terms of presenting at things like this. We have a series of free webinars, and we have training which anyone can tie into. And we've also produced what we call the Techability Standards for Assistive Technology, which I'll introduce towards the end if Alistair doesn't ring his bell too hard at me.
You've got two bells.
So our web address is techability.org.uk if you want to find out more about us. What we did just recently as part of a different conference is pull together some positive technology outcomes from the last year. So we're trying to not use the C word, the COVID word, but we're trying to say, you know, what's happened over the last year, and what are the positives we can take. And lots of people are doing this. They're saying, what's the really good things that we found worked well, that we want to hang on to, and we don't want necessarily to go back to normal, as it were, and throw all this stuff away because we're going back face to face. What can we learn? And there's a lot of stuff in technology in general, learning technology and assistive technology, where that applies. So what we did is created a series of a mini series of podcasts. We talked to people in specialist college settings. And so you'll get the short version today, the very short version, but the long version is in the podcast. I'd encourage you to listen to those, because there's a really good discussions going on there about engaging learners who weren't previously so engaged, talking about digital skills, platforms and systems that are happening in the background, but also a lot about flexible teaching and learning. Some of the people tying into that are doing they've changed the way they teach to a certain extent so that it can be a lot more flexible and use a hybrid model and use the best elements of the hybrid model. So that's on anchor.fm/techability. So on to the meat of what really I wanted to talk about today. And as I said, there's three things I want to talk about. The first is about remote technology being an assistive technology in itself. As Alistair mentioned, we're going very wide on the definition of assistive technology here. But really, what we found with our discussions from people in education is that they found that for specific groups of learners, online learning was a real advantage. And you've probably heard this a lot from other people as well. But one of the quotes that I like is a tutor from a college said she felt that for her learners she works with autism, their sensory alert system is calmer. She felt that eye contact over Zoom was very different from eye contact in the classroom. And just the general presence of people, that person was allowed to be in a space where they felt comfortable, rather than being in a room with 4, 5, 10, 20 other people that they may not have been comfortable in. We found a lot of people were talking about the fact that the advantages they could take on was that learners may not be in the building full time, and they may not have to be in the building full time. That wouldn't be an expectation. And therefore the assistive technology might be the fact that they can be at a distance, and they can maybe tie into some face-to-face sessions, but others remotely. And assistive technology in the way of talking about pastoral support for learners. So these final 2 points are kind of the same, really. It might be that a particular member of staff has a particular connection with a learner, and to be able to do that remotely using online technologies is a lot easier than having to say, right, well, let's make an appointment and you need to come into the building. Secondly, systems themselves. AT, assistive technology, is really poor without the right IT in place, and there's a lot in the podcast about this. That we found a lot of stories, anecdotal stories about learners who, when they were learning at home, they had greater access to their assistive technology and learning tools in general than they did when they were in college, because the systems had blocked things. By trying to make things safe, sometimes IT teams can be over enthusiastic and they lock down, and some of the general Windows accessibility settings and things like that, learners weren't able to get access to in college, but they could at home. The other lessons that came up was about choosing platforms carefully. Obviously, early on, there was a big rush to just find a platform that we could use for remote learning. But we need to be careful and make sure we can do things like auto captioning or add a captioner in. Can that learner zoom in on the screen that's being shared so they can see it more clearly? Do they know the keyboard shortcuts? And the other thing, IT-wise, was about improving everyone's basic digital skills. So we're talking about staff here mostly, not just of the learners. Lots of staff had to skill up really quickly. But if that baseline had been higher to start off with, they might well have had an easier job. So if everyone's digital skills can be increased across an organization, then in situations like this, everyone benefits from an assistive technology point of view. So, thirdly, really less human input can equal more independence. Lots of stories about learners being able to use the assistive technology tools and that they required them more during home learning because there weren't other human beings in the room, where typically they might have turned and asked a member of staff or maybe another student to help them with a task. They felt that they needed to rely on the accessibility tools more. Now, this sounds pretty harsh that we're saying, oh, well, let's remove some human support and put some assistive technology in place. And I'm not suggesting that happens overnight. But in terms of having a sliding scale approach, can we move from human support to assistive technology support so that when that learner moves out of a college situation, they've got the skills they need and the independent skills. And a lot of that might be around seeing things like the immersive reader in Office 365 that there's a picture of on the screen, not as an assistive tool, but as a productivity tool, introducing it to learners as, well, this is just here, you can use it. The same for a lot of the tools in Google Classroom and the add-ons in Chrome. And it improves everyone's knowledge of built-in accessibility. It might be that sometimes if you call it assistive technology, people think, oh, that's for a specialist team to take care of, when actually it's everybody's responsibility. So I just wanted to quickly mention the Techability standards. This is something we put together so that everybody within an organization can know what excellent looks like when it comes to assistive technology. The resource is online at bit.ly/TA standards, or you can just go to the Techability website and find it. And it's a range of standards looking right across assistive technology and whether organizations have got things in place to make sure all students can access what they need. What we've done over the last year or so is introduce a new one called blended and online learning, which again, we hadn't thought of before COVID, but it's really just looking at the particular sets of skills and what needs to be in place to make sure that blended and online learning is accessible. And I'm stopping talking in a minute, Alistair, just to highlight training courses on the Techability website. I'm happy to take your questions in the Q&A now, if I've got time, Alistair, or we can.
Oh yeah, you've got 5 minutes. Yeah,
right. I was going.
Well, 5 minutes for questions. That was the 1 minute warning
right.
for the end of the presentation. So
brilliant.
Another minute if you want to finish the presentation. But basically, we've now got 5 minutes for people to be able to come back to Phil and ask about that.
Okay, so I will take a breath and take some questions rather than going back up.
Now, the first thing I did notice, Kate was asking if you could put a link to the podcast, because I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing the whole lessons that you learned.
Yes, I will. I will post that in the chat if I can highlight it from my presentation.
That's fine. There's no immediate. Yeah, or if you can do it now, that's great. So, any other questions? Any other observations? So, Keith's got one here in the chat. So, Keith's saying that don't forget that application of technology for some is a worse approach. So, have you got any kind of feedback from your experiences as to how that's handled, or how you balance some of the really positive things that came out with some of those more difficult things?
I totally agree, Keith, and I think it's one of those areas that we need to be really cautious of, that making sure that for some people it doesn't go the opposite way, that we don't go down the avenue of saying, right, well, technology solved so many issues over the last year that everybody just needs to use it and get on with it. I would totally be against that kind of approach. I think, to me, what it comes down to is an individualized approach, as I'm sure you're all on board with, but making sure that when it comes to technology, there's some sort of assessment in place that takes into account that person's situation. There's an interesting assistive technology model called the HAT model, which is all about getting the right assistive technology in place, but it's all set within the context of what that individual wants to achieve or can achieve, or maybe their life context. And sometimes people who are keen on technology can forget that, and they just go, right, here's a solution, boom, off you go. They don't take into account the learner or the person's preferences. So yes, totally agree with you on that.
Can I ask you, because in that last minute or so, you obviously, my bell was panicking you, but could we go and have a look at the training? Are there any of your training courses that support this?
There's not a specific course around that, but one thing we do as part of our training, I mean, the one thing that might support it really is a course on supporting AT at all stages of a learner's journey, that looks at pre-intake and a learner's journey throughout their time, right through to when they might be transitioning out of college, and what needs to be in place and how their needs and might change during that. So that might touch on it to a certain extent. But coming back to assessment, what we do sometimes for colleges is that we will do more of a consultancy-based approach, and we'll come into a college, we'll deliver some assistive technology assessments, but make sure that other people can observe those, and that we're passing on the skills to the people who are going to be in there every day. Because AT assessment should be a continuous process. It shouldn't be a one-off. As the learners' needs change and they're going along, a reassessment or a reappraisal might need to take place.
And presumably they may need less support as time goes on if the support that's been in place has been appropriate. They may be more independent.
Yeah, ideally. I mean, I always think that the less hardware or software that somebody has to carry with them or take with them, if that's enabled them to move to being more independent, you know, there's an interface, I think, between assistive technology and learning technologies. And sometimes the learning technologies can be more appropriate, and there's a crossover there. If that's not too vague, that sounded really vague, sorry.
No, not at all.
Bigger discussion, I think.
And if you want to unpack that a little bit more and then carry on in the chat there, we've had a couple of comments about the experiences of deaf signing students. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce Lillian now, but Sorry, I'm going to introduce Craig. Sorry, Lillian, for panicking you, and Craig for panicking you. But there's a couple of questions in the chat. Perhaps, Phil, you could have a look at that, have a look at those and pop any responses that are appropriate in there.
Also,
and thank you very much for that, Phil. That was a really clear overview. And I'm going to pass over to a very old friend, Craig Mill from Call Scotland, who has done, Call Scotland's done some brilliant work on their wheels of apps that some people may be familiar with. If you aren't, you've got a treat coming in. So, Craig, do you want to give us a quick overview then of what you've got, and also how you keep it up to date, because you're recycling and revisiting some of that at the moment. So over to you. And two bells, you know, the one means you're halfway through, the second one means you've still got a minute to go.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. And Alice is going to be popping some links in as we're going through now, just to help out. So thanks very much. So as Alice said, my name's Craig, and I'm the Assistive Technology Advisor at Call Scotland, and we're normally based in Edinburgh University. And I think Alice will pop the link in just now to the Call website.
Yep.
If you're unfamiliar with CALL, CALL stands for Communication, Access, Literacy and Learning, and we're a team of 10 people, and we're a mix of speech and language therapists, so we're supporting pupils or learners with communication difficulties. We have a couple of engineers, and we have a couple of administrators, teachers, and myself. And it's essentially, we cover the whole of Scotland, advising on how technology can support learners with a range of additional support needs. There's a really lot of information on the Call website. So I'm just on, you can see the breadcrumb trail to information, and we cover all these different areas. And there's a whole range of technology that we can think. But what I'm going to do is really signpost you to some of the more popular resources that we have. I suppose infographics that we've got, and just maybe talk a bit about them. So this is the download page, and hopefully Alistair will pop that in. And the kind of areas I'm going to look at here are the posters and leaflets that we've got. So just go into posters and leaflets there. And you can see we've got a whole range of posters that are available to look at. Where did it all start from, actually? So if I just trying to get rid of the top bar, if I can get rid of this top bar where that, maybe just minimize this a minute, just so I can get the, how do you get rid of the top bar on, let me see if I can get, I'm trying to get rid of the zoom bar so it's not in my way and I can get access to tabs.
Oh, yes, that's interesting.
So I can't actually get to any of the tabs just now that I've got set up. So I'll just maybe minimize that down a little.
You can see them at the top.
Sorry, you can't see the whole screen, but here we go. So it originally started off back in, let me see, 2012, because at the time when iPads came out in 2010, there were loads of iPad lists of apps, recommended apps, lists were everywhere. So we thought we'd maybe take a different approach and sort of contextualize it within a context of a book. And it's proved really popular. But of course, after a year, it was out of date. So, quite a small team, so we don't have a great, sort of time to update these things. So I did update it to a new version, to iOS 7.1, but then very quickly that was soon out of date as well. So my colleague Alan, he sort of created this thing called the Wheel of Apps for Learners. This was the first resource that we used, the Wheel of Apps. Although we did focus on some of the posters looking at some of the built-in options as well. And this, I've just let you see how it looks. So the first one was really sort of developed into categories, or broken down into categories. So we had within sort of text-to-speech, reading ebooks, working PDFs, and these are kind of, a lot of these apps were originally programs that we used before the iPad came about. So some of the companies such as Claroread, Texthelp, these sorts of, they've been about for a long time, and we kind of knew that they were relying, sort of, the apps were really quite good. So we kind of built the wheel around there originally. And that's really how the sort of Wheel of Apps started to develop. But of course, there was a new generation of app developers who were really unheard of before now. So a lot of our decision making was based on, if I just go to the Joy Zabala site, so we used a kind of a framework. Phil mentioned the HAT framework. We used the Joy Zabala SET framework, and SET is an acronym for Students, Environments, Tasks and Tools. And this is where the learner is placed at the center using a collaborative approach. So we use what was called the SET scaffolding data forms, so we could identify the learner's needs, the tools they use in context to environments and tasks. So that this is how we started drawing some of the wheels and some of the apps together. There's also quite a lot of, thanks Elsa, there's also quite a lot of sort of app rubrics as well that's available as well. So we kind of use some of them looking at the apps rubrics, and I have a Word. If anyone wants this one, we can send it. It's not available anymore, but you can send it. So this one is kind of split into engagement, curriculum relevance, engagement, students' needs, usability, feedback, differentiation. And it was kind of, did it meet the criteria? And if it did, we would sort of add that to the list. So, based on that, as I say, if I just pop back to the Wheel of Apps, we started creating these posters mainly because they were so popular. So there's a whole range of resources on AAC that you have here, looking at apps to support AAC. And then, of course, we started looking at Android apps to support communication needs, Android apps for learners with dyslexia as well. And then there were more general ones looking particularly information for schools and local authorities, just to check, were they meeting their sort of legal requirements as well. And what really became popular after that was just identifying or exploring some of the built-in tools that were on the iPad. So just as I scroll down here, we've got using the iPad to support dyslexia. So these were all the built-in tools that are readily available. Using the iPad to support learners with physical difficulties, visual difficulties as well. If I just pop into the, let me see this one again. So this just kind of, it really just highlights some of the tools that are available that can be used. So one thing we were I was very kind of aware of, although there were thousands and thousands of downloads of the app wheels and the infographics, what the app wheels didn't tell you was actually how to use some of the programs and how to make the most of them. So it prompted me to start developing a series of videos. So on the call channel, I think Alice has maybe got the link for that. I've started over the past year putting together a series of playlists which kind of support the app wheels and the infographics. So we've got, for example, we've got a playlist on, so these are iPad short guides to support reading and writing, and they take you through really basic things on making web pages easier to read, using speak selection, using the speak screen controller, typing feedback, check spelling, predictive text, right through to using an external keyboard and a mouse with an iPad. So as well as that, I started just recently finished something, the playlist on a kind of really introduction on how to create accessible documents. So it really just takes you from the very beginning on, what is a Word document, right through to creating an accessible Word document, a PDF, and then through to an EPUB. And finally, Windows 10, which is a bit older now, did that a couple of years ago. So that's looking at all the various options in Windows 10 to support visual impairment. So I hope that gives you a kind of overview and useful resources that you can use to support learners or yourselves in different contexts. Thanks, Helen. I'll stop.
And you're ahead of time as well. Thank you very much for that. And I can see lots of people looking at the text chat pane thinking that's going to solve some of my staff training needs in the coming months. So great to see those playlists. So any questions now? Phil has done a great job at answering the questions in the question and answer panel from his session. Any comments, questions, worries, anxieties, suggestions from what we've been through with Craig just now? Fabulous resources, they certainly are. So I'll give people a minute or two to look, and there are links as well. It's quite possible people are on there looking at the links, and if you want to do it, that's fine. We've got a little bit of time now. We've got another 10 minutes for the discussion and the exploration, and then Mesa Obeid's going to be talking to us from Zayed University. I'm really looking forward to that. But let's spend this 10 minutes. We're not going to hurry you through. You've got 10 minutes. You've got some links. So have a look at some of those links. And then when you've had a look at some of them, come back and tell us how you would use them.
I should also mention that we have a series of, one of the links is the links to blog articles, and they're kind of a rolling series of articles of stuff we found out, of new stuff that's just, you know, we've discovered, and we maybe write about it as well. So they might be quite useful as well.
So there's a couple of questions coming in here, Craig.
Yeah.
Then Mesa would like to know about the apps rubric, because that was a nice one. Yeah,
that one I showed isn't available anymore. But I could probably send it. I don't know if there's a way I could send it to everyone. Otherwise, for today, I sort of just did a Google search on apps rubrics for teaching and learning, and found a couple. There's also apps, I think, as well. There's actual apps you can get at the app stores, rubrics in themselves for identifying specific apps.
Okay, now there is, I know from the Future Teacher series, if any of you are familiar with that, there is something, I'll just find it for you. There is a tool that we have used in terms of being savvy, being digitally savvy. I'll put the link for that in there. And Kathy's asking about using your resources in an HE context. Would there be any problems with that, or are they kind of, do they look as if they're primary oriented? Do you want to talk through that?
Well, been in lots of colleges and higher education establishments, and I've seen the posters up on walls, so I know that they're used in FE and HE, because they tend to be, I mean, we're funded for schools, but, you know, I have an FE and HE background, so I was trying to put focus on them, that they're general tools for everyone. So in the infographics where you're looking at, you know, things like how to support dyslexia with an iPad, how to support VI, these sorts of things, they're generic for all learners, really, not just younger pupils.
And the videos, when you're doing the training, presumably that's neutral. Yeah,
they're the same. You know, things like just creating an accessible Word document. That's generic for everyone. Yeah. The iPad to support literacy, again, it can be used across the board. And the Windows VI one specifically for, I know someone, a needs assessor in one of the universities. That's what she uses for her training for all her students. So she told me. So I think that's Strathclyde University. She said it was a lifesaver for her. So all her students use that as a training resource.
Kathy's asking, do you specifically have any input to primary?
Well, as I say, we're funded for, so we do workshops for primary schools, we do workshops for secondary schools as well. So we have a lot of input. One of the things that we have on the COL website is the Books for All website. So this is a portal for teachers to download accessible digital copies of printed books. So books like TG, these sorts of things, or curriculum level books. Teachers can download the book and put it onto the pupil's device so that he or she can sort of you know, adjust it and amend it, use text to speech, all these sorts of things. So they have an accessible version of the paper copy.
Does that link at all with the RNIB Bookshare?
Well, we don't get as much funding as our RNIB Bookshare. So if if teachers can't find the books they're looking for on the Books for All website, we sort of always direct them towards the RNI Bookshare, because they'd have so much more funding, and there's so many more books that's available.
So I'll give people a little bit of time, because I think it's so rare you go to a conference and you actually have time to explore the links people are giving. Normally you have to do that in the evening when you get home. So
did I finish too early?
No, not at all. No, we've built in 10 minutes.
Okay. Right, okay.
5 to 10 minutes we've built in for all of them. So you were bang on time. Well, actually 30 seconds early. All to the good. But we wanted time for people to reflect, to be able to look at links, and to be able to discuss.
Maybe just mention the other thing, and I know you have an interest in this, Alistair, is that the other thing that we have the Scottish Voices.
Oh, yeah.
So we have adult voices, we have teenage voices, and we have children voices, and we have a Gaelic voice. So they're all available for free download for people in the public sector. And we know that they've made a big difference, especially for younger learners who may be using an alternative augmentative device, an AAC device, where they're using a device for their own speech. And we've heard lots of examples of male users having female sort of voices in their devices, and vice versa. So now for younger learners, they can have a young voice. And for older learners, they can have an older voice, or teenagers, they can have a teenage voice as well. So I think that's made a big difference too.
That's really interesting. I think Mesa, who's going to be up speaking next, will be particularly interested in that, because getting hold of good quality local dialect, local voices is an important thing, and I think Mesa may well touch on that. So any other questions? You've had a chance to have a look at some of the links. This is your last few minutes to be able to pick Craig's brains. Or indeed, if there are other resources that you think it would be great for Craig to include on some of the Call Scotland apps, the literacy apps, the dyslexia apps, the assistive and augmentative, or whichever way around that is, for those different wheels of apps, if there are some good links that you spotted aren't on there, I'm sure Craig and his team would be very pleased to hear.
Yeah, we would.
Okay, well, I'm not going to rush people, and if people are still busy looking, or if actually it was such a clear presentation, there are no issues or controversies or questions, then that's great. We'll then move on a couple of minutes early, and I'd like to introduce you to Mesa Obaid. And Mesa, I've only had contact with relatively recently, but I just found it really interesting to be outside of the UK bubble of education and assistive technology and kind of disability support, and get a completely different perspective, and in some ways very refreshing perspective, on how it's done in a different culture. And so Mesa Obaid from Zayed University is going to talk to us about changing perceptions and aspirations from a Dubai context. So Mesa, if you're ready, we'll pass over to you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction. Before I start, I just want to tell Greg that we use iPad Apple Wheels a lot. It's a must for us. We use it even in the higher education context. We are providing services for students with learning difficulties. So iPad Wheels is a must, and we print these wheels and keep it in our offices. So definitely after the conference, I will be contacting you. Thank you so much. So greeting everyone. Here's Mesa from Dubai. So let me, before I start, introducing our services and the university, let me just start to introduce the concept, here when we are dealing with people with disabilities. So here in the United Arab Emirates, we call people with disabilities people of determination and recognition to their achievements in different fields. So during the session, you might hear me saying people of determination, or in the slide. So we are using this terminology now in the United Arab Emirates. And the good thing that we started even to see that Gulf region, even in Jordan, other around countries, they are started to use this terminology. We started using 2017, and now it become popular. Even yesterday I had a conference, and all of even people coming from different countries, they started even to use people of determination. Where we are here in the United Arab Emirates in terms of supporting and have law to support people with disabilities, in 2006 it was the first UAE federal law to support and ensure equal access to people with disabilities. It has different pillars: education, employment, access to assistive technology, and many other pillars. This was also it came with the UN, UAE. They signed and ratified the UN nations law, and it starts to shape from there. So we start to have at least some international laws, some international appearance in outside UAE. Now I'll just give you a brief also introduction about our department at Zayed University. So at Zayed University, we have two campuses. We have one campus in Dubai and the second campus in Abu Dhabi. And we provide accessibility services for students with disabilities. And our main mission, this is really, really important because this shows what we are doing every day, how we support the students, how we ensure that really they have equal access to education. It's not only a terminology or it's just a mission, we just keep it, without, translate this to a practice. We make sure that students, they have equal access to education. We empower them. We follow up with them after graduation to make sure that they find really a suitable place for them. And even we extend the services to support them if we need to provide a training in their work employment. So mainly our vision comes from the government initiatives, government policy, and the vision how to support people of determination. So mainly, I understand outside, UAE, these services could have other disabilities, but mainly here in the UAE, we provide services for students with vision impairment. That include low vision, blindness. We support also students with physical disability. We provide also support for students with learning difficulties, and I will just elaborate more about this part. We have also some students with autism, and we support students with hearing loss. Mainly, in our context here, we have students with hearing loss and deaf students. Unfortunately, sometimes students with deaf, they are not eligible to enter the university because they had reduced curriculum in the school system. So in our university, the registration for people with disabilities or students with disabilities should be like other students. They have to have the same criteria. And once they accepted from the registration, we will start to provide the services. So if these students have reduced curriculum and they are not, at the same level in terms of academic level, we are not able to provide this support. So because of that, you will see that we don't have a lot of students with hearing impairment in our university, or especially deaf students, because they are not able to meet the criteria for registration. We have a quite good number for students with ADHD. And we also try to provide support not based only on the disability type, it's based on their needs and even abilities. So what kind of support and services we provide them? Basically, there is two paths for these services. For students with vision impairment or for students with low vision, physical impairment, usually once they finish the registration process, the registration officer will send them to us. We will do the assessment to make sure that if they need assistive technology devices, we need to make sure that we have this device before the beginning of the semester. We also provide materials accommodation. We convert text to Braille, or we provide tactile maps and all of these services. Our main, challenge is for students with learning difficulties, because usually they come to the university, they join the university, but they are not diagnosed. So they start in their academic journey, and they face a lot of challenges and the struggle. And then after that, they will, because we have good, awareness system, and the faculty and, deans, they know what is the services, they will refer them to us. So once they refer these students to us, we will start, with intake session. We have psychologists, you will do the assessment for them, and we have learning specialists will sit with the students, provide individual training, and just go like other, services. I think one of the most powerful thing that we have our centers. We have two centers, Khalaf Al Habtoor and Ahmed Al Tayed, between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. These centers are fully equipped with assistive technology devices. Really, we make sure that we have the latest technology to support our students. We know that we are not in terms of the speed like other countries in terms of accessibility and assistive technology, but now we start in the first step. So we want to make sure that we really have good steps to improve and to accelerate the process. So we have Braille machine devices to translate different softwares to support students. Recently, before pandemic, it's not recently anymore, it's almost 2 years, we opened Abdul Wahid Rustumani Inclusive Center. It was inspired from Apple technology because it's very accessible for everyone. So we create a center with keeping in mind accessible furniture, inclusive space, even we have a green wall for students, and we started to open it for all people, even outside the university, to support them. So I think one of the really most important things, or our asset, is these centers, and we will be opening another one in Abu Dhabi. All of these centers and the improvement we do on a regular basis comes from our network outside UAE. So we are contacting people, in the state. I think one of my colleagues were in this conference 2 or 3 years ago. So we are trying to do some networking outside, our area. Where we are, before I just move to where we are, I just want to show you the numbers. So we started the department in 2011. You see that we started to have that increase. When we started, we provide only services for students with vision and physical and hearing impairment. In 2016, we started to provide services for students with learning difficulties. So today we have around 260 students, and this number is increasing because we have the majority students with learning difficulties. So after this quick introduction, where we are now, where we are now. So since 2016, we are Apple Distinguished School, recognized from Apple because we implement the technology in a very innovative way. We support the students. Our students, they started to use Apple technology like other students. They use voiceover. And also on the local or national level, we support other universities. They don't have much facilities as we have, and the human resources. So we support UAE University, Sharjah University, and we started also to support and communicate with other universities outside UAE. So we support Sultan Qaboos in Oman, Kuwait University, Saudi Arabia. However, we keep our communication and network outside, the Gulf region, and even, outside Europe or US, just to get the latest resources, technologies, and ideas. Very quick, before I just move to people of determination strategy, we have national policy to empower people of determination. We have 6 pillars. Because we have this policy, recently they have announced Abu Dhabi Comprehensive Strategy for People of Determination, and it will be between 4 to 5 years. I think the interesting thing here that there's 30 initiatives under this strategy. The good thing that for each pillar, we have one team, we have team leader from other institutions to lead this initiative. It's not a shared responsibility. There's a team leader who is responsible at the end of the day to provide, information about the improvement and what they have done. This initiative, it's from the United Nations Convention, so at least we have that connection, and it's parallel with the international laws and community outside UAE. How we support this at Student Accessibility Services Department, how we support these initiatives. We have the outreach program. We started since last year. We support not only internal community, we support Zayed University community. I have the last slide. I'm not sure if I still have time or already I finished my time.
Well, I think if you don't mind going a little bit into your discussion time, that's fine. You could take another couple of minutes and then people can discuss from that. That'll still give us 8 minutes discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I want just, before I move to recommendation, I just want to go back for one slide just to show how we work, what is our model to support students. So students with disabilities are in the center of our services, and then we have all the team, accessibility team, supporting the students in terms of assessment, training, providing assistive technology devices, because we have loan system and sometimes we manage to get devices for them forever. And then the second circle is the environment around them, is faculty, staff, even IT people, the campus accessibility. And then the outer circle is the outreach, because we found out that students, they are coming to the university and they are not ready. We have blind students, they are not using white cane ever. So imagine that she's a university student, and I need to start teaching her white cane now. And outside, I know outside in different countries, this is skills since they join early intervention centers. So this is our model. So we started to reach out to schools to support community, to support teachers, and even students with disabilities, to make them ready to move to university. Last thing from our experience here in the region, I think it's very, very important to have a clear definition. What do you mean by inclusion, accessibility, equity in your institution? What is your vision? What you want to achieve? You need to know where you are now and what you want to achieve within 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, because people tend to say we are inclusive environment, we are accessible environment, but on ground it's not accessible, and there is a scale for the accessibility. So we need to have really a clear definition for inclusion, accessibility. I think we need to start to think about mainstreaming the accessibility and inclusion policy in our daily or in general all policies. I understand that we have a dedicated policy for accessibility, but moreover we need to mainstream this to all other policy. We need to involve people with disabilities. Recently, we started to do accessibility testing for a platform. And, I said, we can't do this without students with disabilities. And even if we have faculty or whoever wants to join this team, we want them to come. We want to hear from them. We need to improve human resources. Next semester on September, we will start to provide training for HR, how to provide inclusive environment. Definitely the most important thing in our context here is awareness, awareness, awareness. We still need to do a lot in terms of awareness. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maysa. Really comprehensive, lots of information there. And I think I'm just looking at the questions. If folk want to sort of bring in some questions now, pop them in either the question and answer part or the chat box. Keith is asking, what do you think will be your biggest challenge in taking this approach forward?
Again, as I just close the session, is awareness. We need to increase the awareness not only for people. We need to increase awareness for the higher management, for decision makers. Why we want to get this budget? Why we want to lead these initiatives? Because usually people will support such initiatives, but when it comes for funding and policy, they are not sure if they want to take it forward. So I think awareness is the most important element, because people still they don't know why we need to have people with disabilities in their work employment, why they should join the work, what is their abilities and capabilities. I think this is one of the main challenges.
Do you think there's
And
any?
sorry,
carry on.
one thing just came to my mind. It's really, really important. We don't have a professional or specialist here in UE. We don't have people are specialized in assistive technology. We don't have even colleges to provide or courses. If you want to get these certificates, you have to go outside or abroad to get these services. So we don't have expert in this field in our region. I think this is one of the really also another main challenges.
That's it. That's very interesting. I'm sure Craig and Phil are going to be excited about whether or not they could set up a Techability or call UAE center. One of the things I'm really interested in what you were saying about awareness being the biggest issue, and I think a lot of us would understand that being a problem for the teaching staff, the academic staff, the managers, the budget holders. Do you have any experience about the student awareness being a problem, where maybe a student just isn't aware of things they could ask for because nobody's ever told them? Do you come across that in your outreach work?
Yes, so we have different, angle for this challenge. First of all, we have students, they have disability, but they don't want to share this because they feel they don't want to share it because they feel stigma. They don't want to get labeled, because if you declare that you have disability, this will be in your transcript, this will be forever. So they don't want this, and especially in our culture and perspective, they don't want to be labeled that they have disability. So definitely they will hide it. The second thing, that they are not aware about these services. Every year we do 60 class visits and school visits, and still people, they are not aware that there are services, even if it's not to the level that we wanted, but still that there are some services. The second angle for this a challenge is students without disabilities. They don't know how to interact with people with disabilities. So if they have a group work, they will just avoid to have students in there, not because their intention is not good, but they don't know how to interact, what I need to do. So now heavily we started to provide training sessions, etiquette, how to interact, what should expect, and we start even to encourage them. If you have a student with disabilities in your classroom, please come to our center. We will provide the support. You don't need to accommodate anything for them, even papers or anything. We will do it. Please come to us.
That's really helpful. Very interesting. There's a couple of more points coming in the question and answer area, and Kathy saying, a hugely inspiring overview for a start, which we would agree with. But she's also saying that she has observed that you haven't really talked about mental health difficulties, which we see as a big issue in the UK context. And Jonathan also asks about, are students with long-term mental health conditions included in that legal definition of people of determination? So can I ask you to address those?
Thank you so much. It's really one of the important questions, and this is always we receive the same question. So for us, Student Accessibility Services Department, we are under Student Affairs. So there's another department, they are providing support for students with mental health or issues. For students also with long-term condition, we have also clinic, and they provide support. However, the important thing that we are all working together to support all students, because definitely we have students with learning difficulties and they have anxiety issues. So we have that referral system. We have students with physical disability and they have long-term, other conditions, diabetes, for example. So we have that, referral system connection. However, we see, for example, if the primary issue is disability, they will be under us and we will provide the support. If the primary is, for example, mental health, it will be under, a counseling department. If it's a health condition, it will be under the clinic.
Okay, that's very helpful. Now, I'm going to start Lillian's session now, so you probably won't have time to answer this to everybody verbally, but Keith's asked about assistive technology tools taking into account the use of different languages, such as Arabic, and I know you definitely have some things to say on that. Could I ask you to respond to Keith in the question and answer panel?
Definitely.
So that everybody can see that? That's great. Thank you very much, Mesa. It's so refreshing to get a perspective from a completely different culture and to learn what we can learn, what we can take from that. And what I'm going to do now is to introduce you to Lillian from the University of York, who has gone from being somebody who several years ago was interested in STEM subjects and assistive technology, and I was telling her the kinds of people that she ought to talk to, and now she's one of the people that I send people to talk to. So Lillian is going to talk to us about assistive technology and STEM teaching, the challenges and opportunities. And I've taken a minute of your time, so I'll give you your full 10 minutes.
Thank you, Alistair. And just to set the record straight, I'm an educational advisor at the University of York, and I actually look after the social science department. And so my journey began when I was working with my economics staff and my management staff who teach with a lot of equations, mathematical text. And obviously that then rolled into this massive thing. So I'll be covering some of the things that, oh, by the way, I've got a link to the slides, which I will post in the chat. So if you prefer to follow along on your own screen, feel free. So we're going to look at the challenges, tools, approaches, and personalization and recommendations for organizations in 10 minutes. This is going to be challenging, but we'll start with a story of how people teach mathematical subjects. And this goes across anything that's chemistry, physics, biology, maths, and economics management. And this is a slide from one of my maths tutors. And we were looking at, before COVID, we were looking at how we might digitize the handwritten materials for students with visual impairments who are attending classes. So I had to go with this, and I used Equatio. And straight away, you can see from the slide that there are going to be issues because on the chalkboard, contrast isn't always going to be very high. Not only that, the tutor tends to use the chalkboard as part of a kind of performance, teaching performance. So they're crossing things out, which helps with learning the subject. So you kind of need to be there and to be watching it. But what's happened since lockdown is that obviously we've got tutors who've had to pivot very quickly, and they're saying, well, teaching online was fine, but much more time consuming because they had to plan how they were going to convey the same information and perform the subject. It was harder to focus talking to a camera like I'm doing now. And many of them still improvised at home. Many of them stole whiteboards, magnet boards from their children and put them in front of the camera and continued to do the writing, which was quite, I think, could be quite engaging. Alongside that, many more of them provided their notes digitally. So that was kind of good. It shifted their practice. But they were doing this in LaTeX or R and not always in the most accessible way. And they still feel that it's better if the students still prefer chalkboard style teaching where you're interacting with the maths on screen. So here's an example from an economics finance type module where, you've got the very cold terms on the screen, but the tutor's circling it to add that layer of understanding for the students. And then they're actually drawing out a few formula on screen as well. And that's okay, but obviously there's some challenges. And there are challenges even with digital resources. So digital resources aren't the panacea for STEM teaching, okay? So yes, they might create digital resources, but can the students see it so that it's sharp enough if they zoom in? Will they be given the notes in advance? And if they get given the notes in advance, does the tutor change it just before the session so it's still out of date? Tutors still need to do things like speak the entire equation. So a lot of them tend to leave out open paren, close paren, and they'll say things like, so I'm going to cancel this from here on this side of the equation. And they need to kind of learn to speak what they are doing. And some mathematical symbols don't actually have an equivalent in Braille that's easy to understand. So even if the maths is translated into a usable form for a visually impaired student, they still have a challenge sometimes, okay? Now, materials can take time to be digitized for the students, and you have to think about transcriber skills as well as the tutor skills. So there's a lot to think about. And so, yeah, I'm just going to skip a couple of slides quickly to get onto the kind of organizational approach and things that you might do to ensure that you get from a point of working with one tutor like I did to working with a department to suddenly realizing it's a whole organization challenge or opportunity, as I like to see it. Thank you, Alistair. So first off, staff use a whole range of ways to create maths, from writing, handwriting, to Word documents and PowerPoint, to LaTeX and R, and lots of other things in between, I'm sure. So you need to be thinking about supporting them along all those fronts. You know, if you're doing practice A, what can I do to get you adopting practice B, which is much more accessible? So you need a whole organization approach. I'm just going to kind of start revealing what we did, which was we started off with a Word doc, Google Doc, and I started putting in things I discovered. And so different roles would appear as I uncovered a little bit more practice by our lecturers that were different from anyone else. And then we started exploring the ways of doing things, usually with interns helping us to do a bit of that research. We've now evolved this primer into an actual website. And I can copy the link into, this is the thing that people have come for, really, the goodie bag. So this website, which your tutors may understand better than, to be honest, I probably don't understand it half as well as my maths tutors who come across it and go, this is great. I really see how this is going to help me. We're planning to put in the glossary along with the JISC Accessibility Clinic Maths subgroup. There's a few of us working on the glossary. So I'm just going to kind of tie in what Mesa said about the approaches to kind of making the support work as an organization, right? And I literally just copied and pasted this slide in 10 minutes ago, because I've talked about this idea of the disability gap before, learning about it from our Universal Design for Learning camps, that you've got to look at what you can change in the environment, but you can also approach it from the student skills perspective. And it's quite important to remember that with every action that you plan to do. So again, from that Universal Design for Learning camp, I came across the kind of pyramid, and it blew my mind that quite often we design actions, but if you bother to try and map those actions against some framework, and it almost doesn't matter what kind of framework. And Mesa's was lovely with that concentric circle, right? It helps you to remember all the different layers that you need to look at and consider. So the UDL pyramid is just one of those. And this is how, you know, our thinking was mapped across something like the UDL principle. So, you know, it meant that we remembered, for every action, we remembered the implications for students' skills, the implications for staff skills, and what the organization needed to do to support that. And another kind of goodie bag, this slide has like links to all our tangible examples. Obviously, not everything has got those tangible examples yet, but where I have got examples of things, I've linked onto this slide 16 for you. And just some things I wanted to show, for example, a LaTeX kind of template that we were building that's available on the kind of math site, and creating a good source of guidance. I think lots of universities are better at this than ourselves. When it comes to supporting students, we seem to have guidance from every single team, and the student has to go looking. We certainly believe in stimulating conversations. So we have our actual STEM tutors sharing inclusive practice and ideas for that. Emily has spoken at the Future Teacher webinar before, and you can kind of have a look at that. And we have, let's see, let's just move that out of the way. And we have finally just this idea of shifting digital accessibility across the whole organization. And I've written a blog post about that you can read to understand what that thinking through was. So yeah, a real traipse through I'll call it my monkey mind. When I approach a project, it goes off like a mind map, and I have to corral myself and my actions using these kind of frameworks and things. But yeah, that maths and mathematical text website is certainly one way where I kind of confine myself to what I'm trying to do. So any questions?
Thank you very much, Lillian. And Keith's got a question in there straight away, so I'll let you go to that. But could you, just before you go to that, could you go back, sharing your screen, to that lovely summary you had at the end?
The
where you had
UDL one.
Yeah, your UDL framework, and how that was it. How you were shifting, moving up the pyramid from level 1 being everything for everybody. I think it may be helpful if you would say a little bit more about that, but let's go back to Keith's question first, and then we'll see what other questions come. If we've got time, that might be worth you unpacking that a little bit further.
Okay, so Keith's asking about, with regards to STEM, how do you feel AT, assistive technology, can offer better support when dealing with mathematical functions in the way it does with language tasks? So I haven't overtly mentioned a tool that we've acquired and have deployed across the whole university called Equatio, and that is part of the Textile Read-Write family of products. And so Equatio allows you to dictate your maths, and you can even have it read back out to you, so you can check that you've written the correct maths. So things like that can be really helpful for anyone with dyslexia or even visual impairment, except that it's quite a visual tool to begin with. And to be honest, our VI students don't use things like Equatio. They have other systems that they use for that kind of thing. And so I think there is AT available if you look for it. Highly recommend Text Help Equatio for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Trevor's saying, amazing presentation, many great tips and insights. So thank you very much for that, Trevor. Ali is saying, are you sharing your findings with other unis? Because Ali is supporting maths at Leeds, and clearly you have similar things that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we're trying to do this through the JISC Accessibility Clinic. We have a subgroup. I think we've met twice. And as part of that, I volunteered to kind of write the organizational approach, which is on the Equations website. and they've taken the job of starting that glossary, you know, all the terms that they don't understand. They're going to take the term and almost like as lay people, they're going to find the kind of definitions for it. So we have been kind of promoting it in the Accessibility Clinic Teams event. I think I'm guilty of saying it's not quite finished yet. Maybe I shouldn't quite tweet it, you know. There's a lot of stuff in that site already, to be honest. So we kind of promoted it on the 20th of May on Global Accessibility Awareness Day as kind of our contribution on that day to accessibility. But, you know, happy to work with anybody who would like to join the group and contribute, really, because we are all supporting academics doing mathematical things.
And this, of course, would be very cross-cultural as well, because despite, you know, if you're working in different languages, the language of maths is international.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, Ali.
Lillian, can I just check that I'm right in an assumption I've made? I've just popped into the text chat pane how people can contact either Kelly Moat or Laura Hutton to join the JISC accessibility teams.
Absolutely.
Community. That's
right.
the link. Okay, great. So we've got a question there. Yes, Ali, in fact, a comment rather than a question. Yeah, most unis working on their own in bubbles. I think there is a large extent to which that is certainly true.
Yeah, just one thing to add. I know the heads of e-learning forum, they've talked about this equations primer before. So the heads of e-learning are aware of the materials, and it's whether they've then passed it on within their organizations to, you know, the equivalent of me in their university who's interested in this. I've certainly heard from lots of universities who have said they've come across the primer, they found it helpful, and then they've used that model to create their own university support for staff.
Now, Phil's just popped a link in here as well, and Phil and indeed Craig as well, either of you two, if you've got any other contributions about technologies that you've come across, that you've used, other tools or sources of expertise, do you want to open up the microphones and tell us, Phil? Tell us why you popped that link in there.
Oh, sorry, that link is just a general information page about the Accessibility Assistive Technology Network. I mean, people can drop an email to Kelly or Laura. Techability's kind of involved with that community as well. We help facilitate it and facilitate meetings and things like that. I did have a question for Lillian while I'm on. I'd heard a while ago, Lillian, that Equatio wasn't up to the job of hardcore maths, but am I mistaken in that, or has it developed a lot? This was maybe 18 months ago. Has it developed a lot?
We have put it through the paces with higher education maths, and it is people who write LaTeX assume they can write pure LaTeX in there. And they have to work a little bit slower, not as fluidly as they might do on a tech code platform, but it certainly can be used. So we have examples on that website, and I'm adding another one from an interview I did with a GTA. So she's obviously a researcher doing peer support on mathematical materials.
What's a GTA?
Sorry, graduate teaching assistant.
Thank you.
And our Math Skills Center get involved with using this. And it's if you're going to digitize a lot of maths, I would certainly say that it's a help rather than a hindrance. But for your tutors who use LaTeX, you're better off meeting them where they are and not saying, oh, use Equatio. Ask them to use the accessible template for LaTeX documents, and then ask them to learn to use Pandoc to create the accessible format. So Equatio isn't for everyone from the bottom of the handwritten maths all the way up to LaTeX. If you're already using LaTeX, start there and look at the advice along that row, basically.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Sorry,
What I would say, one
Great,
last
yeah.
thing is that Equatio is very useful for the students. They don't come into the uni and learn LaTeX. Tutors expect them to just pick it up.
Yes.
So Equatio is a really good, handy way for them to get started learning LaTeX, because they can screenshot a bit of complex maths and then look at the LaTeX and learn that way. So it's actually a really good LaTeX learning tool.
Could I think Craig was just about to say something, and then we'll start with Ros.
Yeah, it was just to say, it probably isn't relevant for some of the HE, but certainly for schools, if you use equation editor in Words, Immersive Reader will read back the notation that you've created in Words. So it's quite useful for that, for maybe lower end type of maths.
And that's definitely worth knowing for for the breadth of audience that we've got. So great, thank you very much. So now thank you, Lillian. That's great, and I think there's like all of these different presentations, there's loads of stuff to go away and reflect on afterwards. And your link that you've given us will give people lots and lots of fun delving into the geeky side of maths. What I'd like to do now is I'm very pleased to have Ros Walker from the University of Stirling come and talk to us about something we don't always think of as an assistive technology, lecture capture, because lecture capture is brilliant for all sorts of students, but how do you then stop it becoming a barrier? What's the best way to balance those different requirements? So over to Ros.
Okay, hello everybody. Really good to see so many people here this afternoon. I'm actually going to begin by recapping on something that I did for the NADP journal and conference probably about 4 years ago now, but I'm going to then progress it for work that I've done more recently. So I became interested in captions for videos at the University of Huddersfield when we rolled out Panopto for lecture capture. And what was very interesting there, sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm now actually at the University of Stirling, where I'm learning technologies and design specialist, but I've retained my interest in captioning and assistive technologies. When we introduced lecture capture at the University of Huddersfield, we were required by the Equality Act to make the reasonable adjustments. So we needed to make sure that students who were watching lecture capture got the same benefits that the other students were going to get. And also we were aware that the public body's accessibility regulations were on the horizon, which meant that any content we developed had to be as accessible as possible. One of our final year computing students, a lady called Jasmine Beck, conducted some research with disabled students, and she found out in their first year of using Panopto for recorded lectures that they found it useful for lots of reasons. But actually, when we looked at these reasons, they were the same reasons as our other students, but to a slightly greater degree. So for example, they may have struggled more with the content in the original lecture, so therefore they revisited lecture capture a little bit more. It's always useful for reinforcement and confirmation. Some students stopped using their dictaphones and started relying on it, but it did depend on the sound quality. And also they knew they didn't need to spend the lecture time taking notes because they could revisit it afterwards to continue with their notes. And also for those students who didn't always make it into university, they didn't need to worry so much about taking time off if they needed it because they knew that the videos were available there for them to catch up on. Little did we know that this work would have such an impact on what's happened over the last year, and I'll come on to that in a second. So what we looked at was we spoke to our hearing impaired and deaf students, and we asked them, how do you normally manage in a lecture? And there were 3 reasons. So some students were able to lip read. If they had a hearing impairment but had some hearing, they always made sure that they positioned themselves at the front of the lecture theatre to lip read. Some students had a BSL interpreter, if that was their normal mode of communication. And some students had hearing aids or a classroom position and a note taker that enabled them to get enough from the lectures that they could cope with the lecture. So our questions were around, if we set up lecture theatre, do our cameras in the lecture theatre capture the speaker well enough for somebody to lip read from the speaker in playback? can we capture a BSL interpreter who is signing in the classroom? Or would closed captions provide a viable alternative? So we began researching these questions. When we looked at lip reading on a recording, the answer to that was no. We couldn't see the speaker's lips. The classroom was often slightly dark because the board was highlighted. In fact, in some cases, we couldn't see the speaker at all. And you begin to realize that lip reading is actually quite hard in a real environment, never mind a recorded one. So that was not going to be possible. We also tried recording the BSL interpreter. So you can see here we've got the speaker on the right. On the left, we have the BSL interpreter sitting to the left of the board. And we discovered that the capture that the cameras in the room were getting was just not good enough to capture that BSL interpreter. We couldn't see the fine finger detail that you rely on. And so we had to rule out that form of BSL capture. But we did wonder if we put a second camera in the room and we tried an iPad on a stand, would that capture the BSL interpreter well enough and we could run it as a parallel stream in Panopto? It seemed like it was a really good solution at first, and we did manage to do some good recordings, but it was very difficult to get the recording off the iPad together with the other stream. So we found it difficult to find a suitable tablet. We found that our upload speed of an hour-long video, for example, wasn't good enough. And also there were issues about setting it up ready for the lecture. Could we expect somebody from AV to run over to the lecture theatre and do it? Would the student themselves do it? And then what would happen if they were absent? And there were just a lot of complications around it that seemed pretty insurmountable. So we began to look more into captions, and Panopto could actually provide auto captions. I have to say that 3 or 4 years ago, these were absolute gobbledygook. They were rubbish. I wonder how Caption Ed has just done gobbledygook, but anyway. But we could buy into a service where we could actually get them captioned to a human level. So you can see here that we've got the captioning. It's the white text on the black background, but actually we had a lot of options within Panopto. So you could choose whether it was on or off the video, you could choose a color, and you could choose a size. And actually we interviewed one of the first students that we used captions for. So I'm just going to let her speak to you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say to me about lecture capture or your experience of it?
In the last year, or the last few months really, that I've used the lecture capture with the subtitles, it's made a massive difference on my grades. I don't think I would have finished with a 2-1 if I hadn't had them for that module. That was the module that I was struggling on the most. So if I hadn't had those subtitles when I needed them, I don't think I would have got a 2-1. I literally just scraped one, just because in my final year I was struggling so much with my hearing and the lectures. So I think having that kind of like the lifeline just there to give me a bit of a boost and give me a bit more motivation, knowing that actually I can do it now, because I don't have to worry about asking my peers for information or going back to my tutor. Like, you get told not to go to a tutor at the last minute and ask questions. This I didn't have to. So I didn't have to ask him at the last minute. So that was really good. Just a lot of independence. I like my independence.
And that was pretty much where we'd got up to the last time that I spoke to NADP and looked at this research. So we moved on from there. The cost of captioning was pretty large, and it was really important that we did it. You've heard about the benefit that it gave the student. And the more deaf students I spoke to, even if they were using BSL or lip reading in their first lecture, they liked the captions because they were so accurate for follow-up. So our options at that stage were that if the student was deaf and has a BSL interpreter, we can try a high quality capture, but it's very difficult. And actually the captions made more sense. If the student is lip reading, the captions made sense. And if the student has another disability such as dyslexia, or for our international students as well, the captions also made sense. So it seemed to make sense that we moved on with captioning. I moved at this point to the University of Stirling, where we also used Panopto, and it was very interesting to see the development that we had there. We were looking at captioning, and then as the pandemic happened, we realized we were going to be working a huge amount more on screen. And actually, at Stirling, what we've done over the last year is all of our lectures have been condensed into short videos. Everything for every course has been re-recorded into 6 to 20-minute videos followed up by an activity. And all of these have been auto-captioned. And that's because Panopto changed its ASR, Automated Speech Recognition System. And suddenly the jump in quality was colossal. So we just switched it on for the whole university, which meant that all of our captions were then available on all of our videos. The captions aren't perfect, but the students that we've spoken to currently are actually really enjoying the quality of them, and it's better to have that than to have nothing. So in conclusion, I think there have been leaps and bounds in the technology over the 5 years that I've been working in this area. I'm really interested to see where it goes from here, but certainly for our videos, we feel that captions are a very good option. The lecture videos have been well received. BSL would be definitely useful still for some students, but it's hard to capture the BSL interpreter, and captioning is useful for almost all students, but can automated captions fill the gap sufficiently? And that's the question that I'm going to leave you with now.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a really, really good question to ask people. And I'd be really interested in what other folks' perspectives are. So we've got 70 odd people in the call. What are your experiences? It's been really interesting looking at what Ros has found, and I was impressed with the way the research was carried out. But let's see what are your different approaches, because many of you will be dealing with a range of different students. So do you want to pop something in the text chat there? And if you have any specific questions for Ros in relation to the presentation, then add that in there too. But I think we'd all be interested in who is currently working with auto captions. In fact, if you just pop in the text chat, if you're working with auto captions, that's a yes. If you're not using auto captions, not using any kind of captions, that's a no. If you're using human supported captions, so the highest quality, then just type in there human. So could we have a yes, no, or a human in there?
Of course, what's interesting over the last year as well, I was looking at this for lecture capture, but as we've seen this growth in Zoom and Teams and other conferencing systems, the captions have also appeared just as they are doing today using Caption Ed and Otter and things as well. So
we've got a couple of yeses. So for 3 yeses, so some yeses in terms of people using auto caption. Any no's? And then if anybody's using human quality.
It's very interesting to see the one there about also using student interns to do corrections as well. That is an area that we have looked at. We did attempt to do some transcriptions with students. It was working out very expensive again, and that's not to say that we rule it out completely, because obviously for a student who needs that level, it's really important that we do get that. But at the moment, the students are reporting that they are happy with the auto captions.
Now there's a couple of questions coming in if you want to look at those. So Keith's saying, what would be a good approach for lecturers to use to highlight the key points in a lecture in that approach?
So I think there's a couple of things that have come in that are important. With the approach that we use now, where we've broken lectures down into these chunks, we suggest that people have just 1 or 2 key teaching points in each of the short videos, and that is backed up immediately by an activity. So students get to watch the video, improve their comprehension or knowledge of that subject, and then carry out an activity. We do ask that any complex words appear on the screen. So for example, I'm responsible for Faculty of Natural Sciences. So we get lots of fantastic chemistry and biology coming into that. So if there is new language introduced, it should appear on the screen as a key point. And then if the auto captioning doesn't pick it up properly, the students can work it out from what they're seeing on the screen as well. And that's not saying read the screen, because we all know that's quite a dull approach to lecturing, but make sure that complex words do appear on screen.
One of the things that ties in with the second question, with Jonathan's question there about the recommendation, well, in fact, the law apparently, as it is interpreted in the UK, is that the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guideline compliance requires 100% accurate captions, and that leaves organizations and leaves disabled people in particular in a slightly tricky situation, because if you go down a route of, if we can't afford 100% accurate captions, we won't use lecture capture, that's a backward step. Equally, if you say we can't afford 100% accurate lecture captions, we don't want to stop lecture captions, so we will regard it as a disproportionate burden and just carry on as usual, that's also a backward step. And there is some guidance, I'll just pop this in the text chat pane, some guidance I created with the Disabled Students Commission to help organisations handle that transition, because it could be a long time before the technology is close to giving us 100% accurate captioning. But there's a lot of good ideas that have been kind of checked and sense checked with a lot of different people in that guidance. So have a look at that. And one of the ideas is that you make sure that every presentation you have has got a glossary page at the beginning, or a glossary slide, so that if people come across weird interpretations in the captions, they know what the weird words might be.
I have to say as well that, speaking as a linguist, the chances that we ever have 100% accurate captions are very, very slim, because we all make errors in our own speech all the time.
Exactly.
And when you're dealing with a global variety of accents and different ways that people speak, we'll never have 100% captioning. I think it's important to stress that students who do declare a disability through disability services should have that entitlement to the 100% accurate captions, because clearly they have a requirement for it. And yes, it would be marvellous if we had that for absolutely everybody, but I would say on balance we've made a huge step forward in all the time that I've been looking at this, compared to where we were 5 years ago.
We have an anonymous attendee comment as a note taker. Some of the captions are shocking to see, and I think that's also something that the quality of the caption does depend not only on the software, but on the kind of microphone you have, on how fast you're speaking, how heavy your accent is, and so on. There is some guidance on that in the Disabled Students Commission link that I've given, but I think I think we have to deal with the reality that within an organization, some people may get high quality captions just from the automated speech recognition, and some people may get very poor quality, and how we handle that for different students is perhaps something we need to think about.
I do think if you're getting a great variation, it's worth lobbying your provider, because certainly I spoke at the Panopto conference 2 or 3 years ago, and one of the things that came out of that was that they did go back and review their ASR, and when they changed it last summer, we just saw a dramatic jump for all the speech that we were looking at. And obviously, yes, it does vary based on speech quality, but do speak to your providers about it if you feel that you're getting consistently poor quality captions, or change providers.
Yes, exactly. John makes a point, John Harding makes a point there about they're looking at institution-wide kind of high-quality captioning with CaptionEd, but they're also investigating the Chrome auto captions. Now, right at the beginning, I can't remember who, that was Craig, I think we were talking to about the Chrome auto captioning. And this is, again, something where students themselves, being aware of what they could do, there is a plugin for Chrome that will attempt auto captioning on whatever you're looking at, whether it's a YouTube video, a Vimeo video, anything that's kind of audio based. There's actually quite a lot of questions in here, Ros, and I'm wanting to get going now on our last but not least session, where we're going to have Trevor from Ahead speaking. So what I'm going to say is thank you very much, Ros. That was fascinating as always, and there's lots of questions there for you to kind of tackle over the next 20 minutes or so. And I'm going to introduce Trevor Boland from Ahead Ireland. Now, it's not very often that I stumble across a website and I just feel jealous. I think, oh, I wish I had made that website. And Trevor Boland's work on assistive technology and productivity is exactly one of those where I had that moment of jealousy and envy. So over to Trevor.
Thank you, Alistair. I'm delighted to provoke envy and jealousy into the sector. So as Alistair said, my name is Trevor Boland, and it's absolutely fantastic to hear. The conversations have been incredibly rich. And like Alistair said, I'm working in Ahead. So for anyone who doesn't know Ahead in Ireland, it's an NGO that advocates for universal design for learning in both further and higher education. And in Ahead, I have the pleasure to be working as the e-learning and digital officer here. In the past, I worked as an assistive technology officer for, I think, 7 years. And today I am delighted to speak about the topic of assistive technology, as it's a topic that's incredibly close to my heart. So one thing in particular that stood out for me when I was an AT officer, and still I'm very interested now, is this blurred lines of assistive technology. As the educational landscape is rapidly changing, and we've seen big changes, especially in recent times. And one of these changes involves assistive technology itself, as its possibilities have widened and are still widening as AT has become mainstream to a large extent. So as a result, AT has never been so freely available in so many shapes and forms to so many students and people. So I find myself exploring these blurred lines of assistive technology as it has become so freely available to so many types of people. And so really this conversation is about an exploration of how do we take advantage of this mainstreaming or availability of AT. So looking at AT, so it can be found all around us. And this quote from an Irish report called the NCAC report speaks volumes. Assistive technology and mainstream technologies are converging, and applications originally developed as AT have crossed over into the mainstream, while mainstream technologies are being used as AT. And we see this throughout lots of systems like the Microsoft, Google, dictation tools now, which would have been very bespoke years ago, like Dragon. Now we're kind of seeing like, you know, so many variations of this dictation tool around us.
Trevor, sorry,
yeah.
just for a minute.
Yeah.
Can I just say your presentation isn't showing?
Oh, presentation isn't showing. Sorry.
So I don't think you've been. I don't think you pressed that magic share button.
Okay, sorry. Apologies. I think this should work. Okay.
Yep,
So
that's all through. Yeah, perfect.
Oh,
Thank you.
perfect.
Sorry about
Great.
that.
God, apologies about that. So, so looking at AT, as I was saying, I use this reference from an NCAC report talking about assistive technology and mainstream technologies and how they're converging. And so applications originally developed as AT have crossed over into the mainstream, while mainstream technologies are now being used as AT. So this evolution of AT is bringing about more AT opportunities and choice, which is the most important thing, and very UDL to all learners. So examples of these are in, as I said, Microsoft. So Immersive Reader is becoming a very commonly known and used tool within the Microsoft tool as it reads out text. So now we can read and listen to text in our Word document that's online, which is useful for reading back essays and aids proofreading. So dictation tools, which I mentioned, not only are they available in Google, but also in Microsoft as well, allow anyone to write with their voice. So this is a useful way to turn your handwritten essay, for example, into a typed document by simply reading out your handwritten notes. Then Blackboard has provided an open website that allows us to convert our Word documents into MP3s. So useful to turn your essays into audio files, place them on your smartphone, and then listen as you go for a walk. So now AT is making it possible for us to get even more fresh air as we can convert our documents into audio files and place them on our phone. So if AT can be for all, so should we start calling it like inclusive technology rather than assistive technology, as potentially it can kind of strike a chord with more of the wider student body? So, and if so, can it also connect with both staff and students as well? And can we encourage then the buy-in of AT by calling it inclusive technology to more people, as maybe the term AT can sometimes be seen as a kind of a term that can be stigmatized slightly. So to explain AT and the Students Board in Education, I'm going to use this three-tier pyramid from an AHEAD publication. And the publication is about the role of the disability officer in higher education. This pyramid has been slightly modified by myself for the purpose of AT and inclusive technology. So it explains the considerations of specialized AT for the individual, and we see this at the top of the pyramid. And then we see AT for small groups, and that's in the middle of the pyramid, and then AT for that greater student body on the bottom of the pyramid. And lately, I find myself getting more interested in that because not all students disclose their disabilities in higher education. So, and then some students just can't afford the assessments that are required for them to get them access to those disability services. So then is there a kind of a greater purpose then to these mainstream and available ATs? So while that student is having to wait to like afford or get access to supports, like could there be a way of these AT or inclusive technology like supports having a purpose to acculturate the student to that assistive technology that may be at some point becoming available to them? So 10 years ago, I started an assistive technology officer, and there was definitely specialized AT for students with disabilities, but not a lot of mainstream AT or inclusive technology options. So educational apps at the time, you know, were having very success, and we could see good to poor, you know, possibilities with these depending on the device you owned. So for example, iPhones compared to Android were different. So needless to say, the gap was wide between specialized and mainstream AT. So options were fewer. And then the challenge of this was ways to encourage or get students to try out AT in lots of different ways. So while now this is what I think the pyramid looks more like now, we definitely see much more choice. Mainstream possibilities of AT are now merging with specialized AT. So it begs the question, how can we benefit from this widespread and available AT? So with this explosion of AT, have we had the opportunity to really think and reflect about how to harness, connect, and embed AT to this wider student population, really to help everyone succeed, especially those students in that wider population who may not know they have a disability or may not have disclosed it? So is there potential to embed inclusive technology awareness into like orientations that colleges and universities have, also to begin embedding these into the student culture itself, to consider promoting these tools and services like the library, for example, to support reading, and in our own context, how can we play a role to promote inclusive technology to support whatever learners we connect with in our work? So one way in AHEAD that we're helping to guide people through this array of specialized and mainstream inclusive technology is via this online resource that we've made called AT Hive. And here, its primary aim is to raise AT awareness and impart AT knowledge and maybe a little bit of wisdom to many types of staff, students, and even employers and employees. And currently there's just over 50 examples of AT, and these are broken down into a number of categories to help kind of guide people through this kaleidoscope of AT. And currently we're going to be working as well on a self-assessment tool regarding assistive technology as well. So people can go into a site, kind of click on a number of options, and then an output will be provided, which will then kind of give them a few clues as to specific starting points to help them with kind of challenges that they have in their kind of academic studies. So within the AT Hive, like I said, there's 12 sections, and we would definitely love people, and thank you so much for Alistair for posting that link in the chat to the AT Hive, and just to kind of get people just thinking and reading, and as I said, just raise awareness about AT itself. So this, I suppose, quote, or like quote by myself, reference by myself, is something that I'm interested, because like the last year, a year and a half, has been an interesting time where hopefully people have developed, technology confidence, using new tools to support them with online teaching and learning? And is there an opportunity now to take this newly found technology confidence and channel it in a new way when we go back to the face-to-face classroom? And by channeling it, could we kind of rethink and build in small inclusive technology considerations into that face-to-face classroom? And here I just have an example of what that might look like. So one way this could look possible is in this student scenario about a student called Emily. She's reading a handout in class, very ordinary, perfectly fine thing for a lecturer and a student to do. So could Emily use her smartphone, take it out, and use an app called Google Lens to photograph the page, and then that photograph could then of text be read out to her by her phone. So she could put her headphones in, listen to that information, and by listening, that would help her comprehension and memorization of text. So could this even skill be transferable into different contexts? And I would definitely say yes. Like, would it be something she could use in the library? Photographing text from books, information leaflets, posters, definitely. And I've included a bit.ly link to a poster that I'm making available to people. They can use it in different ways. And that link is there, and I'll post into the chat afterwards. And now looking at this slide for just a moment, if you just think about this paragraph, it makes inclusive technology suggestions that can help all of your students about reading, writing, converting Word documents into MP3s, online group work possibilities, and even ways to practice and get feedback on presentations using an Office 365 tool called Presenter Coach. So if we just thought about this paragraph, could we add it to the end of every assignment that we give students? So a simple copy and paste, and then this would remind students of all these inclusive technology supports and signpost them to these tools and promote their independence to all these like inclusive technologies. So would this be an easy way not only to raise awareness about inclusive technology, but also to, again, get them thinking about technology, especially as like technology in education definitely supports that person when they transition to the workplace as well. And these tools are highly transferable. So, and again, I've also created a bit.ly link exactly to this paragraph, and I'll post that in the chat afterwards. Oh no, I think someone's already done it. So thank you, whoever's done that. So, so I definitely believe AT is everyone's business, or in this case, inclusive technology is everyone's business. I would most definitely say yes, that potentially all of us like can benefit from inclusive technologies ourselves, or know people who can benefit from inclusive technology. And this can be as simple as spelling and grammar using Word, which I definitely use a lot, even in this presentation. I'm sure a few typos have crept in, to dictation tools and more. So I'm asking people to just think about those possibilities with all these inclusive technologies that are freely available now that can really help that student success. And we're not expecting people to be AT experts at any means, but simply just to be aware that there's this AT Hive resource and that we can signpost students and people to these tools. And definitely just think about how you can embed simple, free, inclusive technology tools and how those students you interact with can benefit with that in some way. So if you just think about one tool that would be key to a challenge you see annually with your students, there might be potential to just explore and raise awareness about that. Sorry, I know I've definitely gone over time, so I will end it.
That's great, Trevor. Yeah. That's really good. Can I just ask, because I think people are wanting to put comments in the chat pane. I've had a couple of people saying through the questions and answers that they can't get into the chat pane and has it been disabled. So if I could just leave that with Lynn to just double check that, or with our Zoom providers. Just make sure that there's no accidental setting being changed. Trevor, thank you very much for that. And I think there's some great ideas in there as well. So if you can get in the chat pane, that's the place to pop your questions. Or if you can't get in the chat pane, put it in the question and answer area. There's some, what I particularly liked about that approach, and I'd never thought of anything like that before, but having that bit.ly AT paragraph that just automatically goes on the end of every assignment or the end of every feedback. That's a brilliant idea for just making it right up front in front of students all the time. I'm definitely stealing that one. So thank you for that.
I encourage stealing. Yeah, so I'm definitely keen for that one, because I just think like the amount of time students like read and reread an assignment is just that go-to document that they're definitely going to read. And if you just add that simple paragraph, hopefully some students will just continue reading and, you know, just even think of clicking on that link and even, you know, start to begin this AT journey. That would be incredible.
So it's interesting, the whole concept of about what do we call this stuff, and you know there are very different perspectives on that. Keith in the chat is talking about sticking with the term AT. What is interesting is when I think back to Mesa's presentation, she was saying that some disabled students don't want to be regarded with a label, and so they may not want to be using tools that are associated with a label. So there are very different perspectives, and neither of them is right or wrong. But where do you sit on that?
Well, I actually really like the term assistive technology. So I'm trying to take on board the term inclusive technology. And I've had this conversation with a few people. So basically my point is just think about your audience. So if you're talking to students with disabilities, definitely use the term assistive technology. Or if you're talking to that wider student body where you may or may not know who has a disability, sometimes those students don't even know yet they have a disability.
No.
So I would pitch that term inclusive technology to them, because ultimately it's going to be a stepping stone, that term, to assistive technology, which is really going to be the more poignant and more accessible term for them. And it's just more empowered as well. I think if a student with a disability kind of owns that term, assistive technology, and I've seen this in a student group that we have here in AHEAD, that there's definitely a confidence to those kind of students when they talk about their assistive technology experiences, the tools that they've used. Yeah, but like I still think there's a place for both, but it's just about considering your audience. Yeah.
Lauren's making the point there about almost a strategic thing, using the move to including assistive tech or inclusive tech recommendations in marking feedback as a justification to actually changing the marking process and making that more inclusive, which is an interesting kind of policy approach there.
Well, one of the things I have definitely heard educators speaking repeatedly about is encouraging students to proofread. As someone who hates proofreading with a passion, I totally see how tools like Immersive Reader can be powerful. You know, you kind of get a new even way of listening back or hearing that essay that you've typed. And you know, any tips or tools that can help students to improve assignments themselves, to adopt new kind of skills. And again, these skills are transferable after education into the workplace. And those kind of read aloud options are just really powerful, even for students, not only to try them, but actually to really begin to explore, like, do they have a preference for voice types and even the voice speed? You know, like they're little considerations, but really when you begin to like explore them and pare down your favorite, like I've got a few favorite voices and I would have a few voices I particularly dislike. So already for myself, I know which voices just click with me way more easily and which voices I can listen to for longer than 10 minutes and which voices I have to switch off after like 2 seconds. So, and so they're really good just tips as well for people to just try out and explore them. And again, personalize that learning experience for themselves.
So we've got a whole range of different comments in there and keep them coming in. Can I just ask Lynn, there was a question earlier, somebody saying, how could we save the chat? There's some really useful links in the chat. Or is that something that would be sent out to people? What's the best thing? Because I don't think people who are attendees can automatically save the chat.
Oh,
have you got?
If we
No,
just
I can
Control A.
I can save the chat. Well, it gets automatically sent to me actually, and I will then edit it to make sure it's a whole list of the questions and links, and send those out separately as, I'll put them on the website.
Put them on the website would be great, wouldn't it?
I also include them in the written transcript as well, that will be in about a week's time.
Okay, well, I would just like to take the opportunity of saying thank you very much to all our panelists, Thank you for each of you coming along. We had a good session. We had 75 or 6 people, I think. I spotted that at one point, might have been higher at some points. So lots of people, lots of contributions. And it's been great hearing all these different perspectives and getting some really useful links. Thank you very much and have a very good rest of the day, whatever you're going on to do now.